Hi, welcome to the CEO podcast. Today we have Scherrie Prince. She is an attorney in Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, amazing. Please introduce yourself. Let us know what you do, who you are, and how you're going to help us here today.
Yes. Look, thanks for having me. I'm an attorney, but I'm also an asset protection coach. I teach entrepreneurs how to merge their business plan with their estate plan for maximum asset protection. And what we try to do is build a moat around your assets. I'm in Flowood, Mississippi, which is right outside the capital city. Really pretty place. So if you guys are ever in the area, look me up. And I'm really excited to be here with you guys to kind of talk about asset protection and how you can build that moat around your business and personal assets.
I think this is so important. And I was so excited when we were able to connect because as a business owner, I think a lot of people just jump right in and they want to serve their clients and they want it to be very, nice and organic, but we have to be able to protect ourselves, especially as sole proprietors. And I know you're in the States, I'm in Canada, and our listeners are probably in both places, but there's a lot of danger to being a sole proprietor in terms of your assets. And I know when I decided to incorporate, it was a big discussion around when to do that and why and all of those things. So I'm really excited to have you here. And I think it's so important for entrepreneurs to understand how that all works and why it's important. So if you can maybe just give us the dumbed down version of what your assets are and why they need protecting when you are your own boss.
Yes. And I give the example of, my favorite friend, John Doe, who can be anybody, but John is a widget maker and John makes the best widgets you've ever seen. And he's great at making widgets, but not so great at business. So with the example of John, I go through like a decision tree on things that John should consider or things that you should consider when you're starting a business. One, as the sole proprietor in your company, the CEO of your company, you have a lot of things you're responsible for. You're responsible for the business itself, but you may have a family that you're also responsible for. And so a lot of times we don't think about how personal finance interacts with the business from day to day, even with our choice of entities. So even though you may be a solo practitioner, you may have an LLC or you may have a corporation. Depending on where you live, if you're in the States, Canada, anywhere internationally, the laws are a little different, but the concepts are the same. So the very first thing I discuss with people is personal finance. What do you own personally? Are you using it in your business? If you are, let's clean that up. And once we clean it up, then we start talking about the different types of entities that may work best for you, depending on the type of business that you have. And so that conversation goes a lot better once you kind of look at your assets. You may have a vehicle that you purchased in your personal name, but you're using it in your business. What happens if you have an accident in that vehicle? Now you have that personal liability. So that's the very first place that we start. Identifying your assets, inventorying your assets, and then improving the classification of those to make sure that you're not commingling funds and assets with your business and personal stuff.
Yeah, so important because I think people are so excited to jump into running their business and getting started and serving their clients. And even a few years in, like if you've just kind of started, or maybe you started in a way that, maybe it was a hobby and people started to ask you to do it and you just were like, okay, here and there. And then it became a business. Like a lot of businesses grow that way. And people don't think about those things until it's too late. And I think that's the key part of why I really wanted to have you on today, was just to ensure that we're kind of opening people's eyes to that. Can you give us a couple of examples of the entities you speak of? So, what types of businesses might fall into what categories?
Sure. And just a quick comment too. No matter how long you've been in business, as you grow, you may need to expand your business. So we'll talk briefly about the different types of entities, but anytime you're in business, I like to talk to people about a 3 entity system.
Okay.
And this totally captures everything and puts a moat around your assets. One, as an entity, you may have a trust. And I am a huge proponent for trust. Those are just about in any country. They have some form of trust that you can use to protect your assets. And kind of look at it like a house. Your trust is the roof of your house. And for each service oriented business you have, or even product based business, any business that is providing a service or selling a product, that is where you're going to have the most liability. So usually, we look at it a couple of different ways. One, is it a public facing company? Is it a company where you don't mind people knowing that you're associated with it? Or is it a company that may require anonymity? Well, at the very lowest level of your 3 entity system, because you have your trust here and you have your operating company at the bottom, you may have have a parent company or a holding company, and they're a little bit different. But what it does, do you see how that protection in between your trust, which holds all your personal assets, and then your business assets? So the options you may have, some people choose to be a sole proprietor. Now that, in my opinion, is the most dangerous type of entity. And Brittany, the reason why is because you are totally responsible for all the liability in your company. You use your social security number. And really, if somebody wanted to buy the company, there's nothing to really buy because you are the company. You can sell the assets from the company, but there's really nothing to purchase. And when you pass away, the company passes with you.
Right.
So you may also have an LLC or a corporation, and the liability is different there, but there are places for both of those. And depending on how much money you're making in your operating company, you may have a corporation that's working with an LLC to kind of defer your tax liability. So you have several different options in addition to partnerships, joint ventures, and there are different strategies to protect all of those. But the main thing is just kind of separating your assets so that you're not commingling those and working with a good asset protection team.
Amazing. To break it down even further. So I personally, the businesses that I own, there are also holding companies and trusts in place for asset protection. I actually put all that in place for my father when I stepped into helping him with his business because he had all of his assets within his corporation, which is very dangerous. So we set those up and moved those out. So I understand it from going through that process with him. And then from the process when I became a corporation from a sole proprietor, again, for those reasons. So to break it down even further for those listening, let's say you offer a service-based business and you have a client that is either unhappy with your service or something goes sideways that's not necessarily your fault, but has caused damage on a project and they are kind of coming after you for reparation of those damages. If you are a sole proprietor and you do not have that asset protection in place, can you give us an example maybe of what would happen in that scenario versus what would happen if you had the asset protection in place?
So let's say that that claim became a lawsuit. So it's beyond the point of negotiation. They've now filed a suit against you in a courthouse. If you're unsuccessful in that lawsuit, they can garnish your wages if you have any W-2 wages. They can garnish your checking account. They can put liens against your personal property. Anything that's in your name, they could put liens against. So let's say, for instance, you co-own property with other people. Liens will be against all of your property, real and personal. And that's something that you really don't want to happen. Now, if you have a company, whether it's a corporation or LLC or a partnership, the charters for those different types of companies, if you have an LLC, it's going to be your operating agreement. If you have a corporation, your bylaws. A partnership, it will be a partnership agreement or some sort of contract or a joint venture partnership. And so those agreements will outline the extent of your liability. And so if somebody sued one of those entities, you're only liable up to the percentage of either your investment or ownership, depending on the type of entity. So let's say that they sued the sole proprietor for $100,000. Well, that person, John Doe, is responsible for the entire $100,000 personally. And really, the only way to get out of that is to try to come to some sort of agreement or file bankruptcy or die. But then when you die, that's the debt of your estate. And now your relatives have to do that, have to take that up in probate. But if they're suing a company and you have 5% ownership in the company, only 5% of that debt is yours if you're unsuccessful in court. So that makes a huge difference.
Definitely. And I think that's kind of where we have to look at this and educate people is that when you are having your own company and somebody comes after you, you have to think of those other repercussions. And I think maybe people aren't looking at that part of it, or they're going, oh, it's not going to happen to me. But if they come after you, they can come after anything you own, maybe with a spouse, or if you have any kind of joint ownership in a home. A lot of people are buying homes with friends these days because home prices are so high. So you're putting those people at risk. And like you said, of course, only if you die. But even then, I know that's, I laughed when you said that, but it's not a joke. If you die, you leave all of those things in the hands of your loved ones who are dealing with your estate. So to protect yourself, but also your loved ones, I think it's important to look at that. Now, if you were to so if you're moving from a sole proprietorship into so a corporation is usually if you're staying kind of as a single person with employees, and then a limited partnership is usually if you have business partners. Is that correct?
It depends. The way that I set up the the entity structure for businesses, it really just depends on the service you're offering. And I rely heavily on your accountant because there are tax strategies. Now, I don't give tax advice, but there are certain tax strategies that you can use working with your attorney and your accountant that are going to give you some tax relief and still give you the legal protections that you need. So, once your company's making over a certain dollar amount, it's smart to open a corporation or to maybe have your LLC take an S election. So there are different things that you can do, but it really, in my opinion, depends on the type of service that you
Okay.
have. Yeah.
And I know when I got to a point in my sole proprietorship, my accountant suggested that if the company had more money than I needed to pay myself, that was the point in time in which we started a corporation. So that was kind of the gauge that she gave me. I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. And also just looking at different tax brackets. So, say for instance, I like to use a nursing home as an example. It used to be before tort reform that when people sued hospitals, nursing homes, and clinics, they would get these huge multi-million dollar judgments against them. And so it was killing the nursing homes. You'd pass by on Monday, it would be called ABC Nursing Home. But now they have this huge judgment and they've just closed that company down and they put a new sign out front. Now it's XYZ Nursing Home, but same people inside. Now, what they're doing and what I advise any company to do and to consider is like when you go past that nursing home, you have one entity that owns the land and the building. You have another entity that is leasing the building for use as a nursing home. You have a third entity that is staffing the nursing home. You have a fourth entity that is purchasing equipment and vehicles. You have a fifth entity. I mean, you just have all these entities that do separate things. So you wind up suing, you have to sue about 12 different entities. And guess what? All of them are judgment proof because the money is in the holding company.
Right.
But they've done some of it for asset protection. They've also done some of that because once the companies make a certain dollar amount, it bumps them up on their tax bracket. Well, the cost to maintain a legal entity is nominal, but the liability, when you talk about spreading it around, you keep them in the lowest tax bracket and you limit the liability and you protect the assets.
That's
So that's,
excellent
yeah.
advice. Yeah, really excellent. And that makes a lot of sense, I think, to show the separations there. And I think that's a very good visual for people. I think that makes a lot of sense that you'd have kind of a base layer and all these little parts that go underneath one umbrella. And so if you're coming after one, you can really kind of only pop one of those balloons at one time, right? And then the
Yes.
danger doesn't go quite as far. It's all these little issues versus one big one. Thank you. That's really good. In terms of where people can start, so you mentioned accountants, lawyers. How does all of that work together, and where can somebody who's never talked about this, never looked at this, where can they go to find that information or even get started?
So the funny thing is, if you are in business at all, either formally as informally as a sole proprietor or formally with a company or a corporation, you already have these people at your disposal. So think about this. If you have a vehicle, you're already paying an insurance premium to someone, right? So there's a relationship with an insurance broker. You should have a bank account, whether it's personal or business. So you should have a banking relationship. Every single time you open up a bank account, they assign you a banker, whether you ever call that person or not. There is a person at that bank who is assigned to your account. Hopefully, if you are, working and you're an adult, you're paying taxes. So you already have a relationship with a tax professional. What I do is I'm like the quarterback for your team. And I take all these people who are already providing services for you, and we put together a plan for asset protection because right now they're working in silos and they're not really communicating about what you need holistically for your business. And so I put them together and we talk about from a personal standpoint and a business standpoint how to make you move further faster. So you're not really looking far. Usually this is the baseline. You may not have a financial advisor or a financial coach, and that's fine. You can always get one of those. But first, get your team talking for you, and then we look at who else you may need.
That's perfect. And you're right. Everybody does have all of those things. They just don't necessarily put two and two together to have them speak to one another. And when I was going through that process of creating the holding companies and the trust, that was exactly what we did. We used a lawyer, we used our accountant, and they all spoke together and did all of these decisions and made all of these plans for us that were so over our head. And it was something that I could never have figured out on my own. And to have those really brilliant people working together for my benefit just felt so great. And it made us so much safer. So I love that you have created something where you can actually do that for people where they might not necessarily know how to do that for themselves. In terms of, do a lot of people do what you do, or are you kind of the only one? Because I've never met anybody or heard of anybody that does what you do, but what you do is so integral and so necessary.
There's only been one other person that I've run into that they kind of do what I do, but they do it like just for real estate. And I'm not sure that there aren't others, but I don't know if they're calling themselves asset protection coaches. I just really saw a need in this area because my first business I started when I was 21. And so just had a lot of hard knocks, had issues with the estate for my grandparents. My mom died without a will or a trust when I was 16. And so there were just so many different issues. And I'm like, I cannot be the only person that needs what I need. And so I just kind of figured it out after law school. And I'm like, other people need this. And so that's when I kind of put together a system for folks because there's so much you already have. And the thing about your asset protection team, you're not spending extra money to do it. This is money, 9 times out of 10 that you're already allocating for a purpose. And I tell folks, treat it like a wellness visit. Most people go to the doctor once a year for an annual checkup to make sure your heart's okay, your blood pressure's low, all that good stuff. Same thing with your asset protection team, but really you need to be meeting with them at least quarterly, and they can actually save you money. Can I give you a couple of examples of how we save people money?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing is a lot of people try to throw insurance at stuff like, oh, I'm just going to get some insurance. That's going to take care of all my liability issues. A lot of times you can be overinsured, but is your insurance agent going to really tell you, Brittany, you have too much insurance because they get commissions, right? And it's not that it's dishonest, but when you have a team of people looking at your entire situation, you have opportunities for synergy. So one of the things that I do is I do an insurance review, and you may be paying $1,000 now a month in insurance premiums. But if I'm able to work with your insurance agent, work with your accountant, and look at your legal structures, we may be able to reduce that from $1,000 a month to $500. What does that do? It puts extra money into your business. You can put that into a reserve account. You can hire more employees. You can do advertising. It's actually saving you money because the thing that'll happen is when they find out that ABC Nursing Home has a $10 million policy, everybody wants to go there and die now. Or, really, because
Yeah.
you become a target. But if you look judgment proof, like, man, if I go slip and fall over there, they barely have the state minimums, which I advocate for. Whatever the state minimums are, that's what we're trying to get you to have, state minimums, because you don't look attractive and there's not a target on your back.
Very interesting. I like the idea of having something where it culminates and where you can speak to everybody and align it. It kind of reminds me of what I do. So I do general contracting and interior design. So what I'm doing is I'm sourcing all of your tradespeople, making sure everything's on time, making sure everything is flowing as easily as possible. But a lot of people think when they do it on their own, they're going to get a better deal, but you're actually not, because my tradespeople know that I've planned the project properly. They know that they're going to get in and get out, that all of the documentation they need is going to be available to them. They're not going to be working directly with the homeowner, so they're not going to have to jump through all of those hoops of trying to explain what needs to be done and everything like that. And I'm kind of the go-to person that wraps it all up in a pretty bow and says, okay, here's the project. So that's really what you're doing. And you're totally right. And I think a lot of people might think, well, I'm not a big enough company to need this, or I'm fine doing what I'm doing. And, I go to H&R Block for my taxes, but
No.
yeah, I know. I will say from experience, I thought that when I first started my business. And I thought that working with my father's business, that was well-established business, but not crazy, making, low 7-figure revenue a year, like nothing wild. But once we started to do that and get that advice and understand those things, we were able to increase for retirement savings. We were able to increase investments in the company. We were able to protect ourselves better, pay our employees better, all of those types of things that you don't necessarily think about, that these people are there at your disposal to do that for you and to understand how to protect yourself better. I don't think there's any negatives to investing in that and looking into how that could work for you.
Well, and what it does, it makes everybody at the table better. It keeps me informed on the tax laws because I'm dealing with your accountant. It keeps your insurance person, honest and back to the table. I mean, it just makes everybody better, and they're better for you. And so a
Mhm.
lot of people think that it's an expense. It's not an expense. It is an investment in your business, just like anything else you can invest in.
Yeah, I did an episode a few back, investing in your business. And this is one of those things that I think is so important. It's not marketing, it's not employees, but it is something that is going to allow you to grow. It's going to allow you to save better, and it's going to allow you to protect everything that you've worked so hard for. I mean, like, why would you not want to protect the things that you have poured your blood, sweat, and tears into. As entrepreneurs, we are always taking everything on and putting everything we have into our businesses. So this is just protecting that thing that is so important to us, which makes sense.
Well, and the one thing that people don't think about is that one lawsuit can wipe your business out. Depending on how strong your business is, it can wipe your business out. And so you may think, well, I'll just close that business and I'll, open up a new business with a new name. But depending on what the claim is, the goodwill associated with your business, what if it's something that defames, all of the great things that you've done? That's priceless. So having that asset protection plan together, it's not just physical things. Your business has IP associated with it. And that, I mean, Brittany, that's a whole other episode. IP. So, I mean, those are things that you need to consider also with asset protection.
Definitely, definitely. So, first steps for people here, what is the first thing they can look at, and where do they go if they are just starting out and just starting to think about these things?
Okay, the very first thing you can do, I have this thing called the 3 I's. Identify your assets, which means literally identify, like, where are they? What are they? Do you have equipment in the garage? Do you have a barn, a storage unit? Identify all of your assets. Second I, inventory those assets. And when you inventory those, you just have 2 columns. You can use this plain white sheet of paper: personal assets, business assets. Third I, improve the classification of those assets. So if you do have that personal vehicle that you're using in the business, by improving the classification, you need to make a decision. Do I need to put this over in the business column, which means I need to title it properly? And if I title it properly, how do I show that I've transferred ownership? Well, you may need to register it with, your local DMV or whatever the registration is where you live. And, on a business standpoint, is that an acquisition or is that a donation to the business? So that's something your accountant can help you with. You identify, inventory, and improve the classification of those assets. That is something that just takes time, totally free. That is the very first thing that you do because you can't protect what you cannot identify. So that's step one.
Amazing. That's great advice. And once they get past that point, once they've identified, how can they maybe learn about the different classifications of entities and where they would fit into that? Because I know you said that different services, depending what you do, you would classify which one's best. So is there somewhere where people can look that up? Or I know you have a podcast, right?
I do. And the
Yes.
podcast is a little different
Okay.
because it's not really about me. I do a lot of free stuff like workshops, Facebook groups. And so that's where you really get me. On my podcast, I bring on people that provide services to entrepreneurs. So
Okay.
all the things that I wish I knew about entrepreneurship, I bring those resources to my podcast and share them with other people. So we don't really talk about what I do too much.
Okay. So where could they go if they wanted to learn about the different classifications of business and where they fit in that big pile?
Honestly, I would recommend a conversation with a local attorney and a local tax person, but I do have something they can do independently with Google University. So, it's just a little, well, I call it a decision tree. First ask yourself, is your business e-commerce or brick and mortar, or is it a combination of both? Okay. And these are things you're going to take to your accountant or your attorney once you're done with this exercise. So you decide about that. Second step is, does your business, is it public facing? Which means, does it require branding, your face or the face of another celebrity or person to promote it? Or do you require anonymity? Because what that's going to do is, if you require anonymity, and like, for instance, if you're in the States, you may have to file your charter paperwork in Wyoming, Delaware, or Nevada. They have, laws and regulations that are very favorable to people that do not want other people to know that they have an interest in a company. And the third thing you want to do is you want to do an inventory of all of your beneficiary designations for insurance, retirement accounts, bank accounts, insurance policies. And you want to really look at those and look at the types of companies that you have. And once you do those 3 things, that's when I would say that you want to have a conversation with your tax planner, not your tax preparer, because they're different, your tax planner and your attorney, because you can Google the different types of entities, but until you have that information there and you share with the people that are going to be helping you with your asset protection plan, you really can make a mistake in the beginning. And it could be very costly if you don't get it set up properly.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. In terms of the biggest loss you've ever seen, tell us about that.
Okay, so I have one client who put several, and when I say several, probably like over 100 pieces of real estate into one LLC. And this person does a lot of residential real estate where they buy and hold and rent property out, puts a bunch of properties in one LLC and got a default judgment against that person. And so now there's a lien against every single property. And we're in the process of working it out. But think about not being able to do anything with all of those assets because they are in one LLC. And simply what should have been done but was cumbersome. Each time you buy a property, put it in a separate entity.
I think,
People.
sorry, I was going to say, I think people are overwhelmed by the thought of that and they think it's so much work, and it's really not. Like, it's really not that much work to open one up. So, if people, anything you're doing like that, you're so correct. So, I love that example. That's perfect because it just shows that if you had just taken a little bit of extra time to do that correct asset planning, then you aren't going to encounter that type of issue down the road, right? And we all think it can't happen to us, right? Everybody thinks that, it's fine. Nothing's going to happen. No one's going to sue me. And especially in Canada, we're not as, I think the state's a little more gung ho about suing people. In Canada. It doesn't happen quite as often, but it does happen. And to just set up those different companies, it is quite easy. So I want people to know that it's not impossible to do. It's very simple. If you just speak to your attorney, they will let you know how to do it. And it's usually just like an online thing you fill out and get a few forms signed most of the time.
And if you have a relationship with an attorney, after you do a couple, they already have a template, so they
Mhm.
know that when Brittany calls, Brittany's in the real estate business. So now she's purchased another piece of property. You can make that part of the closing process. So when you leave the closing table, all that stuff is already set up because you have that relationship. And those services are tax deductible. Those expenses are tax deductible. And those tax deductible expenses are a lot cheaper than litigation cost. So
Yes, they are definitely
yeah.
for sure. Well, you've been an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I think we should do another episode on IP. I think that would be amazing. But let people know where they can find you. I know you have your podcast, but if they want to contact you for the asset protection, where can they find all of that information and where can they find your podcast?
Sure. The name of the podcast is Play Big Faster, and you can listen to it anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeart. And once a month, I do a free training. It's called the Asset Protection Blueprint webinar. And you walk in, you may not know anything about asset protection, but when you leave, you actually have a blueprint for how to start your own asset protection plan based on your specific needs. So I really love to do that. It's an hour. I try to respect your time. We get in, we get the format done and get you out in an hour. And you can find that at www.scherrieprince.com.
Okay, I'll include that in the show notes for anybody that wants to go and take that webinar. I would definitely recommend it based on today's conversation. I think there's no bad outcome to doing that, I guess.
Yeah.
You are definitely going to get something from it, and you're going to learn how to protect what you have and not put yourself in danger, which is super important. And what about Instagram, anything like that? Where can they find you?
Yeah, my handle for all socials is at Scherrie Speaks. And I also do have a free Facebook group. There's no
Okay.
promotion in the Facebook group. We're not selling you anything. It's just us providing value. So I have different recommendations, like as laws change, stuff comes up, and people really just raising their hands and saying, hey, I need help with this. And people in the community and myself as well, jumping in and helping answer questions about asset protection. So you don't have to feel pressured like, hey, she's going to sell me something. There's no advertising in the group. We're a great community.
Awesome. If you can email that to me, I will include it in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up today?
Yes, start now. Seriously, even if it's something as small as just, the 3 I's, identify your assets, inventory, improve the classification, just get started. And if you have a way to remind yourself once a year, look at the plan. Even if you don't feel comfortable starting with a team, just individually look at your plan. Brittany, and I know we got to go, but one thing we didn't talk about, blended families. You said one of the biggest things that I've seen is that I had one guy who was on wife number 3 and still had wife 1 and 2 on different, as beneficiaries on different things. And so when he passed away, could you just imagine thinking you're getting something and wife 1 and 2 are getting something and not
Yeah,
you?
people don't
So
think about those things. And sometimes you have so many of these policies or bank accounts or whatever it might be that you've taken out over time and you forget kind of who it's for, or you don't ever do that inventory of it. Even when you get married, like if it's not about business, like having your your spouse and you go through that inventory of your assets. Because, for example, my spouse had his little sister named as his beneficiary on everything. So when you get married, you go through that and you look at that and you make changes as necessary. So I think that's definitely a very good piece of advice as well, because you definitely need to do that in order to ensure that when you are gone, your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and you're not leaving things behind that are unfinished.
Yes. But that's it for now. I'll wait on my invitation and come back and share more goodness with you. So
You were amazing. Thank you so much for all of the insight. I think this will be a very helpful episode to all of our listeners, and I'll definitely reach out for episode number 2.
thanks so much.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.